Yes, women workers do present problems, Joe.
At the top of every company that I've been in so far, there's always women like a layer or two down, but at the very top layer, it's just usually a sea of white men.
Women represent the greatest untapped economic force in this country, period.
Who do you think's smarter in your class, boys or girls?
Boys.
Since the Equal Pay Act was signed in 1963, the wage gap has been slowly closing. Beginning at 59 cents, we now hear the figure of around 77 cents to the dollar. Today, this narrative is rapidly expanding. The typical 77 cents to a dollar is an average of all women in comparison to white men. White women make around 82 cents to the man's dollar. For almost all other minority groups, including African American and Hispanic women, the figures are even worse. African American women make about 68 cents to the white man's dollar, and Hispanic women make about 61 cents. The only minority group that makes more than white women is Asian women, at around 94 cents. However, it is also important to recognize even these figures are changing. Regardless of race, any difference becomes significant over one's lifetime and therefore must be recognized as an ongoing issue in modern society. Many have attempted to explain this phenomenon with a variety of proposals. Do women tend to gravitate towards lower paying jobs? Do women tend to work part-time more than men do? Is it because women tend to work at home? These are just a few of the questions posed regarding the topic. However, it is important to understand the nuances of the original statistics. Studies have shown that women make less than men performing the exact same jobs in almost all fields. This presents the alarming prediction that women will not receive equal pay until the year 2059. Women are told to aspire to higher education in order to be successful. According to data provided by the U.S. Census, men with a bachelor's degree have a higher salary than a woman does after obtaining her professional degree. Although obtaining a higher degree of education is very expensive, it costs women much more.
Women deserve equal pay for equal work. Today, the average full-time working woman earns just 77 cents for every dollar a man earns. Equal pay for equal work. It's not that complicated.
A recent study out of Yale University that is interesting, where professors were given the identical resume. One had the name John on the top, and one had the name Jennifer on top. And the male candidate was rated more favorably.
Really?
And they were offered on average $4,000 more than the female candidate.
Okay, so it seems we either address the root of this problem and fight entrenched sexism in our society, or all women simply change their names to John. Sure, it'll be confusing for a while, but you'll have $4,000 extra a year just to take the edge off the confusion.
Our experiment is a slightly modified version of this Yale experiment. We gave subjects a copy of either a male or female resume with the exact same information, but either the name Jessica or Jonathan. We then asked them to predict the subject's salary at the age of 30. The idea was to unveil the same discriminatory tendencies from the workplace in our own Peyton community. We predicted that subjects would mark a higher salary for male applicants than female candidates. Surprisingly, however, our results were the inverse. There was a statistically significant higher salary marked for female candidates over male candidates. While different than we expected, we found that these results were still telling. There are a few explanations for these results. First off, it's important to recognize the population from which we chose. Peyton is seen as a very liberal environment in which there are ongoing conversations surrounding race, gender, and other social issues. While we all hold individual opinions, it is undeniable that there are opportunities to be educated on these issues. For this reason, it is understandable to believe that when participating in this study, male and female students of Peyton alike looked to break away from stereotypes and were acutely aware of the age gap in a way that the general population is not. Secondly, we may have unconsciously primed subjects to be thinking about gender by asking them to write male or female at the top of their papers. If this project was to be replicated, we would suggest asking the subject's gender after they filled out the survey. Understanding all of these biases, the results remain interesting and significant.
When examining the wage gap and gender's effect on income levels, we seem to see a recurring trend. In a variety of high-paying fields, there is an incredible disparity between the sheer number of men and women at the top. This lack of representation bleeds over into all areas of life. It means women and girls rarely see each other in some of our nation's most thriving and rewarding fields, and thus not understanding that these roles can be their reality. It also means that people of other genders internalize these messages, or lack thereof, and do not hire women to work alongside them. This phenomenon is known as stereotype threat.
Here's where things get a little complicated. There's a social psychology phenomenon called stereotype threat, and it's kind of a double-edged sword. When you hear you're not supposed to be good at something, you tend to underperform, often unconsciously. In 1995, several experiments showed that black college students performed worse on standardized tests compared to white students when they were confronted with racial stereotypes. When those stereotypes weren't emphasized, black students did just as well and even better than their white classmates. Unfortunately, studies in the past 20 years show that the stereotype threat phenomenon is only getting worse.
The stereotype threat is very prevalent in the workplace for women when seeking to obtain and maintain jobs. Many refer to this as the confidence gap. At a young age, women are taught through avenues such as the social learning theory to act a certain way in order to be respected and well received by male peers. This is prevalent in grade school when girls are heavily rewarded for being quiet and respectful in comparison to rowdy boys. However, as girls get older, this does not play to their advantage. Women in the workforce face additional difficulties negotiating salaries and being assertive. It is not as simple as women not engaging in these actions, but that they are perceived more negatively than their male counterparts when they do. All of these psychological factors come together to reinforce stereotypes and limit opportunities for women in the workforce. After all of this analysis, we finally asked an expert to evaluate what their experience was as a woman that has been in a competitive law field.
I'm torn. On the one hand, there are an awful lot of places, where I don't see it. It doesn't jump out at me. It's not the first thing that I notice. But, when I think back again, like to law school, I think that's probably still the case, that to make it further and faster when, to get the bigger bonus, to get the better assignments, has to do with relationships. An awful lot of what happens in many professions and in many workplaces is relationship driven. And we tend to build stronger relationships with people we're more comfortable with. And we tend to be more comfortable with people who are like us, have a similar background, or, it's easier. And so it is impossible for me to imagine that doesn't come into play. It must come into play, whether people mean it to or not, whether it's malicious or not, intentional or not. It has to come into play. And
in a world where most bosses are white males.
Well, and that is changing. There's no question that's changing, but it's changing more slowly in some professions than others. I mean, in some of the business environment, my sister works in the financial sector, and she's quite often the only woman sitting in a room. So again, she's in an environment where, again, if relationships matter and there aren't as many women in the higher level positions, is that going to play out? I'm sure it is. And so probably the right answer is to do something which I did every once in a while, but probably not as often as I should have, which is to step back. If you're a manager, is to step back. Maybe you don't suspect it of yourself. You feel like you're an equal opportunity and a fair-minded person. And so the unconscious sort of drift, you may not have thought about that. If you step back and look at who's in what positions, who's getting what pay, who's gotten what bonuses, who's gotten what promotions, to see if there are patterns that are pernicious and not what you would expect them to be and not what you want them to be. That's probably something that would be healthy for all managers to do a whole lot more often. Yes, every superhero